Hello, welcome to the panel, The Age of Edge. There is more than meets the eye. My name is Cara Massini. I'm CEO and founder of Edge Infra, a micro data center company for edge co-location and interconnection. With me on the panel are Alistair Waite, data center market development at CommScope, and Rakesh Mukhiya, Head of Mission Critical Solutions, EMEA, and General Manager at Data Electronics. Alistair and Rakesh, I'm going to be asking you to introduce yourselves. Could you start, Alistair?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks very much, Cara, and welcome everyone to this session. I think it's a very exciting session. I'm Alistair Waite. I'm a solutions architect within the market development team here for data centers at CommScope. CommScope is a global organization. I work in the cabling part of our business, the data cabling part of our business. Which has been the mainstay of the business for quite some time. But recently, CommScope acquired a company called Aris, a global company called Aris. We provide switching technology, and also that business came with Ruckus wireless access points. So as a business, we have all the connectivity, end-to-end switching, also wireless connectivity, and the cabling as well. So, a lot of my day-to-day work is working with data center providers, co-location, MTDC, hyperscale, enterprise type people, and helping them to deploy solutions within their data center, specifically here in Europe. So I spend a lot of time in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, Frankfurt, London, and Paris. Thank you, Cara.
Rakesh?
Yeah, thanks, Cara, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to the session for the next 45 minutes. My name is Rakesh Mukhiya, and I'm based in Switzerland. I am head of Mission Critical Infrastructure Solutions business for Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Delta Electronics. Those of you who do not know Delta Electronics as well as I would like you to, we have been in the field of power electronics for more than 50 years, and last 20 years plus in the area of power backup, so predominantly with the UPS. And lately, last 10 years, we have also been very, very active and very successful in the data center solutions business, working with hyperscalers, working with enterprise data centers, working with co-locations and edge. And our offering is like the complete product range, including solutions also on the telecom side. So that's what brings Delta to the market with the European headquarters in Amsterdam. Thank you.
Okay, those are impressive backgrounds. So before we move to the questions that we prepared for you for the panel, I would like to give a bit of an introduction on the edge value chain, also to discuss on what's more than meets the eye with regards to edge, and what has been what are prerequisites to making edge successful. So I'll be sharing my screen with just one slide, so bear with me for a second. Here I am. So for those of you who are viewing this on a mobile phone, that's going to be a difficult one, but it's going to be downloadable later on, so you can review that. What you see here is at least, I've been using this slide in a number of other sessions so you might have seen versions of these, and there are consultants in this industry that also use similar type value chains. But it's basically meant to give an overview of the whole ecosystem of edge in the sense from the device edge, which is where the use cases sit, where the end users sit, devices. So whether it's a use case that is a B2B one, like security, robotics, traffic, information, financial, ledgers, it can be anything really. Or it's a consumer use case for streaming gaming, virtual reality, self-driving cars, or health, e-health type setup. It really doesn't matter. The data production and consumption is at that device edge, if you will. Now then you have the data transport from the device to the infrastructure. That will be any access network that you can think of. It can be 5G or 4G LTE, Wi-Fi, mobile, but also fixed cabling, DSL or fiber. And actually, that's the access networks bring the device edge or the edge towards the infrastructure edge, and that's where you have the locations, either an enterprise location which has a private edge deployment, combined oftentimes with maybe a private 5G or LTE setup and a private network for that particular campus of a large manufacturer or a corporate. Then there is the telco or the network edge, and I mean public network edge in the sense of providing services to multiple customers, either consumer or B2B, but then in a public fashion. So you have towers, those are part of that edge. You have fiber to the home, business park, fiber networks, you name it. And then there is what we call the cloud edge, and that's the edge where the cloud brings their compute to that infrastructure. So the cloud edge could be combined with enterprise and private edge, or telco and network edge, or it could be a setup where there is the cloud edge themselves that they provide their services from to their end users. So from those locations, you have the backhaul networks. The backhaul networks are linked up with those edge locations at the infrastructure edge. Those could be in regional data centers, or they could be in real small locations at a single tenant edge, and they backhaul all the way to where the core is in larger data centers, larger co-locations, but also in hyperscale data centers. So single tenant, purpose-built data centers for large cloud players, content players, whatnot, but also the co-location companies like, we've seen a number of them here today. So all of those in the flat D type markets. So that's the ecosystem that we're talking about. And to make edge work, you pretty much need all of these components to get to where you, to get the edge to be successful. Now, if I move on to the questions. So the first question that I wanted to ask to the panel is, the value chain depicts actually quite a complicated set of prerequisites for edge to fully deploy. And as our panel title suggests, there is much more than meets the eye. In the last few years, a lot of these prerequisites have been started by market parties, and you and your companies have been involved in those developing these prerequisites. So I would like to ask you what you have seen in relation to actual preparations and early deployments over the last periods. And Alistair, I will start with you. Can you enlighten us on your experience with edge infrastructure preparations happening in the European market?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Karen. And very interesting to see the value chain there. I think it clearly articulates there are lots of different players within the marketplace that are going to have to come together for edge to be successful. And that's not just in Europe, that's in North America, and that's in Asia as well. In terms of what we're seeing, it's very interesting, because I mentioned that during my introduction that the part of the business that I work in is the cabling, and that's the physical layer. And that's the piece of the network that has to go in first. So if you think about a rollout of a 5G network or a DSL network, it's usually layered over cabling that's been in the ground for some time. If you start thinking forward and you start thinking about people starting to run their networks, they're really starting to prepare with the physical layer now. And we're definitely seeing that with our customers when we talk to operators, when we talk to data center owners. They've really got their mind on what they have to do to prepare for 5G. The use cases we talk about, the obvious self-driving car, and I think we'll probably mention that later on. It's not quite there yet. The use cases aren't there yet, but certainly the providers are having to put in place the technologies to be able to support that the growth that's going to come. And you mentioned the device edge, and I think that's pretty critical to understand. I think that as humans, we like to think that we're driving the explosion in growth of data in the internet, and it's simply not true. You know, we can't work 24 hours a day. We can't work 365 days a year as humans. We can't think 24 hours a day. We need downtime, and we have conflicting views of how the world should work, and that's just human life. Whereas a lot of communication, the majority of communication, is actually machine to machine. That doesn't need any downtime. It doesn't need any rest. It keeps on going, and it keeps on generating data. And I think your value chain chart was quite interesting there, because it shows that a lot of devices at the edge are going to be generating that data, and effectively you're going to have a lot of data that starting at the edge of the network, it's not necessarily going to be a lot of data, but by the time that data aggregates in a mobile edge site at the bottom of a 5G transmitter, or maybe in an edge site in a multi-tenant data center, then the infrastructure that's going to have to be put in place is going to have to be able to handle a lot more bandwidth than we see today. And talking to customers, they're talking about virtual reality being applications that will be run, augmented reality, and those type of applications. When they start interacting with humans, latency is going to be a huge issue, because if you don't have the graphics in front of you as you're gaming or as you're participating, then you can get seasick, that type of effect. So those guys are really looking at ways that they can increase the bandwidth in their data centers and move workloads around. So we're starting to see people preparing for 400G transmission within their data center. So previously, that would have been 100 gig or lower data rates. We're seeing that data rate increasing. And the interesting thing is that the peaks between the waves, between the time it took to get from 10 gig to 25 gig, 25 gig to 100 gig, and then 100 gig to 400 gig, it's actually shortening. That's what we're observing, is the wave of data is increasing, and the time between the changes in architecture is actually decreasing. So it's very challenging for the world out there to try and put technologies and plans in place to be able to support that. The other thing that we see as well is fiber rollout in networks as well. So between buildings, between cell sites, the increase in fiber is just dramatic. Whereas before that may have been, telephone cable between those points. Now it's fiber optic communication, which obviously has the advantage of lower power and longer transmission as well. So in summation, the use case, I think, is still maybe 1 year off or so, but the building blocks, the physical building blocks, are being put in place now to prepare for that. So that's what I see in terms of edge across Europe right now, Cara.
Thanks so much for that answer. So Rakesh, could you enlighten us on your experience and what have you seen? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, very valid point, Cara, what you mentioned, that the preparation for edge actually started way back, and what also Alistair referred to, it started with the gaming industry in some ways. It started with the content delivery network, because it's like a CD, and it's more like a Pareto's paradigm. 80% of the users need only 20% of the data, which started getting cached at the edge. So all this started, I would say, even in 1990s. Also with the facial recognition, for the security purpose. And then the infrastructure started getting in place. It started with a hub and spoke concept initially, with not too much of resiliency. And slowly it started developing more as cloudlets, with some resiliency being built into, and then, serving the need of the last mile, with the low latency applications. And very likely, what Alistair mentioned, we are still far away from autonomous driving cars, but industry use cases like, you're talking of manufacturing automation, you're talking of banking and finance, you're talking of telemedicine. A lot of these use cases have started building up. And prior to COVID pandemic that we are all unfortunately still suffering with, the edge was already accelerating at I would say, quite an impressive pace. After and during COVID, actually it accelerated even further. A lot of us are doing home offices, the kids are getting homeschooled, the bandwidth need is accelerating like anything. So what we expect in the marketplace is that over 90% of industrial enterprises will start using edge computing within the next 2 to 3 years. And also we expect that more than half of the new enterprise IT infrastructure would be deployed at edge rather than at the corporate or enterprise data centers. So what we see is very clearly more resilience being built up, more security being built up, and the market moving towards a more scalable and modular type infrastructure solution for edge applications with what we call best of breed infrastructure technology, which is being implemented to reduce capital expenditure for the first thing. Of course, in the last mile being close to the customer. So what the operators there are looking for, typically telecom operators, but of course, like Alistair mentioned, also the industrial and manufacturing enterprises also in that domain, they are looking for a high level of power density due to space constraints and a very rapid deployment. Because the beauty of edge is that it can be up and running in a much shorter period of time compared to a traditional large scale co-location or a hyperscale data center, and architecture is getting more and more stable there. So it's a very, very interesting development that we see. And one of the big enablers there is of course 5G. And what you refer to, Alistair, very correct. It's not about people to human communication. It's really about IoT, IIoT. It's about machine to machine communication where we cannot afford a downtime, right? So this is being enabled now with the communication highway, what we call the 5G. And 5G rollout has already started last year. And I tell you, within 2022, 2023, probably entire Europe will be fully covered with 5G. There had been some delays, some hiccups because of safety issues. So that is going to be the huge enabler going forward.
Thanks for that, Rakesh. So just resuming on the infrastructure part of your remarks, we'll dive a bit more into the use cases after this. Would you say that with with COVID and the deployments of fiber to the home and all of the say the collaboration tools and so on, that the pressure and the activity between the larger markets and maybe even the edge deployments in between the larger markets of Amsterdam, Frankfurt, London, Paris, and so on, has increased? So do you see more activity there as compared to previously outside of those markets? Rakesh?
Yeah, sorry, I was on the mute. Yeah, absolutely. Edge is actually primarily going to be more in, I would say, tier 2 markets. Tier 2 markets, we are talking now in Madrid, Warsaw, even in Germany, Berlin, Hamburg, Düsseldorf, and so on. That's where it's getting more and more traction. Of course, edge is also going to be going forward in extension of cloud hyperscalers, because they are getting overloaded and the bandwidths are getting limited with this billions and billions of data bytes being processed at any given real time. So this mushrooming, or I would say this big expansion of edge, would be primarily targeting all this, I would say, tier 2 cities, then also at the edge of the big hyperscalers, at the edge of co-location, and also not only, it started from telecom operators at, typically the foot of a cell phone tower, where they were what's called CORD, reconfiguring their central offices into data centers. That will continue, but a lot of manufacturing enterprises, a lot of industries, and even housing societies and so on would be investing into the edge. So that's a kind of movement we see. Big cities, small cities, I would say more tier 2 markets, and a lot of these industrial and commercial enterprises, and of course telecoms.
Kara, could I just pick up on that point as well? Because I'd absolutely agree with what Rakesh is saying, that we also see activity outside of FLAP-D, which is the new acronym, right? So adding Dublin in there as well. Berlin, Milan, Zurich, Madrid. As a pan-European organization, we see activity in those areas. But something Rakesh said is very, very important about how the network is being pushed out further towards the edge. And you talked about housing associations. The industry has to get used to this idea that not all of the equipment is going to be centralized in a central office or a data center. It could be out in street side cabinets and have to work remotely. So I think it's important that when people are thinking about their edge deployments, that they start thinking about adding intelligence into their infrastructure as well, so that they're able to remotely manage their network, because they're not going to have a technician available to walk into a data hall and reconfigure things. You want to have as minimum truck roll as possible to keep that expenditure down that Rakesh was mentioning. So I think that's important to mention, is to think about how you can make your edge locations as intelligent as possible, the complete infrastructure stack as well, from the cabling up to the switching and the power devices. Sorry, I thought it was important to mention that, Cara.
Yes, thanks. That's very useful, because I mean that's the only way to make this infrastructure efficient and cost effective as well. I mean, it's not going to be cost effective if you have to go out there each and every time. So that's a very valuable remark there. Just one thing on questions. The people that are listening, there is a chat window where you can post your questions, and we'll use those and talk about those after we have the panel questions done, or in between if they're topical. So feel free to post questions, and we'll discuss those. So now moving on from more of the infrastructure side, where we talked about the deployment of basically new fiber, new tower infrastructure, new 5G antenna infrastructure, and fiber to the home, to maybe more the use case side. So all of that infrastructure preparation has to be driven by use cases that are developing at the edge. So there's also a lot more than meets the eye there. We've all heard of, and we've talked about this just now, that the self-driving cars are, that's going to take a while, if only because of the society issues that are part of that question. But if I look at the other use cases, things like smart cities, use cases around industry, IoT deployments, and there's a whole bunch more, e-health. Rakesh, could you, with your experience at Delta in the public space, remark on the developments there in smart cities and so on?
Yeah, very, very valid point you raised, Cara. And actually, yes, Delta has a very strong experience and expertise in the smart cities domain. So basically, what's happening today, more than half the population in the world lives in urban areas, in the cities. And it's increasing exponentially. Now it's expected 68% of the population would be in the cities by 2050. So what is happening with that is population density is increasing. Cities are facing difficult infrastructure challenges. You're talking of security threats, unfortunately. You're talking of crowd and traffic management. And we're also talking of round-the-clock availability of the utilities, right? Water, wastewater, energy, power, everything, right? What it needs is it needs intelligence built into the way citizens interact with authorities and the way authorities interact with the citizens, and all the infrastructure is controlled. It's all enabled by IoT. And IoT, you see now in everything, is like kind of the backbone. We're talking of security cameras, we're talking of intelligent traffic lights, we're talking of smart parking sensors, we are talking of the smart grids, and we are also talking of smart water and wastewater management. All this getting holistically connected into the network. Again, it needs a lot of data being computed and processed close to the last mile, close to where the citizens are. We're talking of cities here, right? Absolutely, we're not yet there at the autonomous driving, but smart cities are already there. So all this data needs to be collected, analyzed, and processed in the real time, especially when you talk of, crime prevention. facial recognition. It needs also low latency, and this is a real use case that we work on. I don't say daily basis, but very frequently. We're talking of smart cities already in Europe, London, Barcelona, Madrid, Warsaw, a lot of cities who have invested into this kind of infrastructure, which is of course enabled through edge computing, because you need real time processing and storage of the data. The true smart city, we have to depend on two technologies. One is the communication highway, the 5G. I already talked about that previously, and the edge compounding architecture. So the most important enabler, I would say, for the success or the real success of 5G as far as smart cities is concerned, is this 5G communication, what Alistair already mentioned previously. Also, this machine to machine communication, these IoT nodes getting holistic data computed and communicated in a low latency platform.
Where do
So,
you, if I can ask a question on that one?
Yeah, sure, please.
Do you see more of that happening at the device edge or at the infrastructure edge? How do you?
Yeah, very, very valid point. It's yet at the infrastructure edge rather than at the device edge. And this
would that be a multi-tenant edge in that?
That would be a multi-tenant edge to start with. Absolutely, that's where it's going. And then eventually, as the devices are getting smarter and smarter, they come into the picture and they become, the extended nodes of the communication. That's clear. But currently, it's more at the infrastructure edge, also for the higher return of investment. And that's where, you talked about Delta's experience is a very strong as the power backbone for 5G. We're doing the rectifiers, we're doing the outdoor, indoor cabinets and everything, powering up the 5G network, which is providing now the communication highway for the data processing and data communication. So all this is going exactly in the use case direction, what you said, of smart cities. So they're not now too far away. I already mentioned I can count at least 10 smart cities already up and running in Europe. And then not only in Europe, you go to Dubai, is again one of the smart cities. And then in Asia, plenty, Singapore, Shanghai, we are talking about. They have implemented and they are benefiting a lot from, from the security access, from the water, wastewater management, from, transport management, parking management. So this local data management, and basically, the big benefit of this edge is the high bandwidth. These smart devices, they are performing complex artificial intelligence algorithms in real time. And now we see this 5G and edge both being implemented, like you said earlier, more on the infrastructure edge at this time being, and then going on onto the devices. I think we are moving closer to the ultimate dream, what we have of highly connected and automated smart cities. So it's a very beautiful example what you picked up among the use cases.
Alistair, if you could add to that from your experience, and maybe also a comment on the use of infrastructure edge versus device edge.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So I'd like to echo what Rakesh was saying. At CommScope, we're also working with smart cities as well, and we do see that rollout. I think it gives a city a competitive edge, actually, being able to digitize what's going on, being able to link up public transport to its citizens and generally make their life better to live. Hopefully that's the main aim. But if we look at other areas, we mentioned the self-driving car, and there's a great data point that Dean Nelson of Uber gave out, that he was talking about their self-driving cars generating 4 terabytes of data per day when they were driving around. And then when they went into self-mapping mode, in other words, trying to discover where they were in a city and what was around them, that rose to 40 terabytes per day. And I was thinking that my satellite set-top box in my living room only carries 1 terabyte. So every day, each and every car is generating more data than that. And then when you think about the applications running within that car, so for example, braking. So if the braking systems are run by Bosch, they may want to get data from those systems, because obviously the brakes have to work on the car. They have to send updates to the brakes.
And it's crucial.
Yeah, exactly. It's extremely crucial. So for them, an edge network is going to be very critical. Let's move away from the self-driving car, because I know that's the one that always gets picked on. I think manufacturing is a good breeding ground for edge and IoT as well. If you look at the way that manufacturing is moving globally, everything is around mergers and acquisitions, trying to bring together manufacturing operations, trying to reduce operating costs. So obviously, the more items that you can manufacture through your facility, then the lower your costs are going to be and your margin improve, and therefore your profitability improves. So you see a lot of global organizations centralizing their manufacturing in certain regions. And the consequence of that is, and what I've seen is that those manufacturing locations become huge, they're massive. And if you go to the automotive industry, you have to have robots to handle the panels, the engines, a lot of the activities that maybe humans would have done previously is now carried out by robots with a multitude of sensors. I think that's generating a lot of data that is being supported over private 5G networks that you were mentioning earlier, Cara. And we've seen people like Amazon producing server racks for private 5G networks specifically targeted at large manufacturing organizations. I think that's probably one of the first use cases that, well, we're actually seeing it now, but I think that's where it will really take off outside of the smart cities and the other areas that we've been mentioning. Coming back to the device edge versus the infrastructure edge, I think that there's a lot of movement at the base station. So I'm reading about a lot of service providers putting in place the edge type technologies required to host compute. So they're putting in that power, they're putting in the fiber infrastructure, but we're also seeing a lot of interest in the co-location MTDC market as well. Those places are very, very well located because many of them, obviously you have your wholesalers who will be out in the countryside because they need lots of space, but retail co-location and MTDC providers have traditionally been in the city center. So they have the ability to be, well, they're positioned very close to population density. So it's quite advantageous for those places to have compute placed there. And of course, if your business isn't data, if your business is making brakes or bottles of cola, but you need to have IoT infrastructure, it's quite costly. In fact, it's prohibitively costly to build your own data center. And I think that's where the co-location MTDC model comes in, or even the renting space in a cabinet at the bottom of the tower. That's where that comes in, because then you can amortize the costs of the power, of the infrastructure, of the smart hands. That can all be amortized, and your business can continue to be filling cola bottles or whatever it is, not building data centers or investing in infrastructure. So I think we'll see more the infrastructure edge than the device edge in terms of our type of business.
And we have a question from the audience, from Tom Moran for Lumen. If we can talk about the applications where the last mile wireless is not 5G, but it's Wi-Fi, for instance, or a private setup, for construction site, remote locations, private for public entities such as public transport and so on. Do you see activity in that area? Rakesh, could you comment? You were not.
Yeah, I think a very, very good point, because we know the telecom limitation is still there. It's not fully, not everything is covered, not even by 4G. If we're talking about 5G, still there are areas where probably it's just primitive. I'm even talking about edge. Personally, I do not have much visibility on that side on how Wi-Fi enabled communication infrastructure could be supporting that last mile. Maybe Alistair, you would have from your perspective some more insights onto that.
I'm in a similar position to you, because as I mentioned, I focus more on the infrastructure within the data center, the physical cabling. I know, for example, in the US, there's been a handover of I think it's licensed or unlicensed spectrum by the military to organizations. So the military has a certain amount of wavelengths they have allocated to them in the US, and they're not using them all the time. So an aircraft carrier is mostly out at sea, not in the docks. So any spectrum that was allocated to that, because it's a small floating city, can then be handed out to the local town. And what we're seeing is an uptick in that in the US, where that spectrum is being reused by local organizations specifically for these type of activities, communication.
Very, very regionally.
Yes.
So very local.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. There's another question from Hendrik Rood from Stratix, who asks us, isn't multi-tenant edge not opposite to the trend towards more and more virtualization? Why wouldn't telecoms firms strongly push vertical integration and deploy edge platforms for virtual computing services? Commenting on that myself somewhat is that we've seen a lot of telecoms companies working together with clouds. That is not necessarily multi-tenant edge. It's more of a sort of a collaboration edge, if you will. Do you see any of that in your environment? So do you feel that multi-tenant edge is the opposite of more and more virtualization, or do you see that there's a complementary?
I think they're complementary. Many MTDCs are offering virtualized platforms themselves, bare metal. So they, part of the MTDC business model is we'll build a data center, come and bring your equipment here, generation 1. Generation 2 of their offering is, well, we'll build the compute as well. So if you're a company in the US and you want to service a market in Zurich, but maybe you're not quite sure, come and try it out, bring your software onto our bare metal, and we'll do that for you. So I think they're complementary. Also as well, we do see service providers playing in this market as well, in the edge market, and offering virtualized services alongside MTDCs. I think some of the operators and telcos around the world have tried to improve their P&L, and they've released some of their physical buildings, which would have been located in city centers. We've seen them sell those off. Sometimes they lease them back because that's a better financial model for them. So some service providers have those central offices in the locations where they can offer virtualized services. Some do not. So I think they're complementary. That's how I'd answer that.
Rakesh, you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's very interesting because the way you see now, there's telecom operators investing into the physical infrastructure and then collaborating with the colocation providers and most of the times with the hyperscalers, because, at one side, you see these telecom operators owning the physical space, but they lack the platform for the computing, right? And then you see these big players owning the platform. They are just bound to collaborate with each other, so it's a complementary offering. They have to work together, and you see all these new products coming in from the big hyperscalers. You're talking of Wavelength from Amazon, you're talking of Azure Edge Zones from Microsoft, you're talking of Anthos from Google Cloud. They are exactly targeting the telecom infrastructure market because that's where they don't own the physical space, which these telecom operators are owning. They are owning last mile. They are also owning the physical space, which is very, very necessary, but they don't have that platform. So I fully agree what Alistair was also mentioning. It's like getting more and more complementary in there, they're working together, and that is bound to happen for the real success of edge market. Telcos and cloud providers, they are just bound to collaborate and create a seamlessly distributed computing environment.
Thank you for that. So yeah, basically, you see them working together. There's a collaboration going on between one telco, one cloud, and another telco and another cloud. Mm-hmm. How do you look at the sort of ecosystem that has evolved along the core of cloud and telco, which is much more centralized in multi-tenant environment? Do you see that that multi-tenant environment will also evolve at the edge?
Absolutely, 100%, because I think this is also something Alistair referred to. The investment onto every single commercial or industrial enterprise to invest into a secure, scalable, modular architecture data center is way too high. Alistair gave a very good example of a software company, beverage company. That's not their core competence, right? So the natural choice for them is to move into this multi-tenant co-location kind of environment, even at the edge, where they are footing up part of the cost, but getting benefit from all the infrastructure that comes in place, which is then seamlessly connected to the cloud. So I see no other option than to have this, multi-tenant edge locations booming up, powered by the telecom carriers and then enabled by the cloud providers. So it's going to be this hybrid kind of a business model emerging more and more, and the enterprise data centers probably will start migrating more towards these kind of infrastructures.
Alistair?
That's our view. Yeah.
Yep, I would agree. Yeah, we do see enterprises migrating towards these cloud architectures, as Rakesh was saying, and we see them looking at MTDCs for a disaster recovery as well. So we do see that movement that Rakesh was just mentioning.
Okay. And then I see that both you have a strong view on that will be the telcos. It could also be a fiber provider that is a neutral type of host, or a tower company that is a neutral host, or a data center environment. What do you see there? Do you see collaborations, new partnerships, or do you see new companies evolving? I'm preaching to the choir a bit, of course, but
I think I think you're right. I think there are new partnerships. I think there are unexpected partnerships. So, for example, obviously not last year because it's 2020, but the year before, I was with a customer, and they were building out a street side cabinet, and that cabinet had some switching in it, and it had some fiber in it, and I asked who it was for, and it was for a local council, and that totally surprised me. And I asked, well, why would a council do that? And it was quite simple. The council owned all the planning permissions. So they actually had the control. They didn't know anything about the switching. They didn't know anything about the power, the cooling, the cabling, but they knew that if they wanted to have a smart city, they were going to have to put this in place. And I think that's a good example, because that took me aback that a council would take a proactive step into the IT world like that. I think you're going to see partnerships between neutral tower hosts and organizations that provide bare metal to go into the compute containers at the bottom. And then you'll see that partnership between tower companies and also container companies as well. I think one important thing about edge is if we look at 2G, 3G, 4G, the business case was driven by the telco. And I don't think that's sustainable going forward. There are so many other people, so many other organizations that play a part, and that will be the real estate companies who manage space. It will be compute companies, as you say, neutral fiber hosts, those people, data center providers and MTDCs as well. I think all of those have to come together to be able to fund this and push it forward. It's no longer just the service provider who will be putting forward the cash and the business case.
Rakesh, we have to be conscious
absolutely.
of time, so you'll have to. What are the last remarks there?
Yeah, absolutely agree with what Alistair mentioned. This whole ecosystem, the way it's developing with a lot of telecom companies, we see they basically collaborating with the professional tower companies like ATC. A lot of them diverging their divesting their tower business to the tower companies, and a lot of fiber companies coming into the play. So the previously kind of a domain ownership of telecom companies is bound to dilute with more and more of these specialized providers coming into the picture, and basically providing the infrastructure that the communities and the societies need. So I 100% agree with that what the Alistair mentioned.
Okay, so I think we've delved into quite a bit of content here today. First, focusing on the infrastructure edge, and then going into use cases and talking about the business models of edge that we see evolving. So obviously, there is really a lot more than meets the eye. Any last words, Alistair, Rakesh?
I mean, from myself, I would just say prepare for the deluge of data that's going to come to the data center, prepare your infrastructure to be able to support future data rates, because there'll be new applications and new business models that you just don't know about yet.
Yeah, fully agree again, Alistair and Kara. I would just say that the key drivers for the edge going forward outside of infrastructure 5G, what I mentioned, is really the security, the scalability, reliability, speed, and efficiency. I think these are kind of engraved in stone, and these are the drivers going forward. And very happy to be part of this industry. The speed with which it's moving and the technology that has been developed there, I think it's very, very exciting time to be.
I completely agree. So thank you a lot for being on this panel. I enjoyed the conversation, and thank you also to the audience that we've had, and the help of the team making this all possible. And hopefully see everyone again next year, but then in person.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Kara, Alistair, all the audience.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Kara. Thanks, Rakesh.